On the war, yes. Oh, I was very anti-war, the war. I didn't think the United States should have been there. I was a student in 1964, and that's when the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened. In which I started college that year, and that was the same year as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which they used as an excuse to invade Vietnam. It's sort of a trumped-up excuse because the war was never declared. But the government said that this incident between two ships off the coast of Vietnam, an American ship and a Vietnamese ship, was reason to go in and be more aggressive, and it started then. But the students were really outraged simply because there was never a war declared. They just gave Johnson carte blanche to go in and do whatever he wanted to do without actually declaring war, and it's illegal. Congress has to declare war. Like to think that we were all really idealistic and we were just motivated by ideals, but the fact is it was my generation that was going to be drafted. It was our bums that were on the line. I mean, if you see now, America's involved in a lot of wars at the moment, but you don't see massive student demonstrations against the war. And I think it's because there's no draft. Um, they don't have their own lives on the line. I was surrounded by people who were anti-war. I wasn't unusual. Um, I don't know. I mean, I might have influenced people of an older generation to look at it differently, to look at it as a war that was different to World War II. It wasn't the same thing. We weren't defending democracy or defending ourselves from attack, and it was a very different war because the attitude always was that if you're called by your country, you go, and so older people had to be made to understand that in fact going blindly, no matter when you're called to go, is not necessarily the best thing to do. That there are different kinds of wars. Well, my father's a history teacher, and he sort of got it. He understood why, um, although they didn't like what was happening, he understood why it had to happen. So there wasn't really so much a divide in my family. Um, but not so much support either. They were sort of annoyed that we were leaving the country, but understood why it had to happen. Um, we didn't get a lot of support, but we didn't get a lot of opposition. The most of the people who got opposition were actual American citizens, men who were going to be drafted, and they refused to go. And those men often got into hot water with their families. It often just cut them off, and that went on, if not forever, for a long, long time. Um, I know one friend of mine, a woman friend, came up with her husband. His mother was convinced that he wouldn't have come up here if it weren't for his brazen hussy of a wife, and she made him do it. Um, and she never really gave up that notion that his wife made him do it. Um, I think it was different in each family, but especially if had been soldiers in World War II, they just grew up with the notion that you went when you were called, and but it was the ones who were drafted who were actually called up, and there weren't a lot of them because for a long time the college students were exempted. So I didn't have a lot to do with people who were drafted till toward the end of the war. Um, but parents did ostracize their sons. I mean, it didn't happen to me, but because I couldn't be drafted. But if their sons were actually called up and they refused to go and left the country, um, some parents never forgave them. Some reconciled later on. Um, well, I wasn't going to get drafted, so I was doing it more out of altruism rather than uh, trying to run to save my own skin. Um, but I did believe quite passionately that these men shouldn't be sent over to be killed or to kill people either. So, I mean, at the time, you got to realize you couldn't even vote then. You couldn't vote till you were 21, and yet you could be drafted at 18. Um, so it just seemed outrageous on all fronts, an outrageous thing to do to young men and to do to the Vietnamese. Uh, I was quite passionate about it. and felt I wanted to leave the country to support the man that I wanted to be with. Uh, and I also, at the time, there was a lot of violence starting in the various countercultural movements, and we had to really think about it. Did I really want to participate in that? Did I want to be one of these sort of violent revolutionaries? And I didn't. I'd rather just leave.